Reharmonization, I imagine that the word itself is setting off alarms and people are thinking, well, crazy music theory and weird chord science is going to follow and it's going to be all about bass notes over triads with extensions. But it isn't really that bad. Reharmonization is a great tool that you can use to add some variation to your solos or to the way that you're interpreting a theme if you're arranging the song or making a chord melody arrangement. In this video, I'm going to go over some pretty basic reharmonization techniques. It can be a really great thing to have in your skill set if you want to play a second chorus and keep that interesting, or maybe you need to just change it up a little bit for the last A in your chord melody arrangement. My name is Larsen, learn jazz, make music. Reharmonization is essentially just changing the chords. That means that when we're playing a song, then we have an idea about these are the basic changes that we're playing for this song, and we just repeat them from chorus to chorus. But you can also change some of those chords so we have an expectation of what it's going to sound like, and when you reharmonize it, then you get another sound, you get other chords, and then that's going to act as a surprise. That's really how you want to use it. You can use this, as I said, as a part of the arrangement of how you play the song, but you can also use it as a way of creating new material for solos, because you're just going to use other changes in the middle of your solo just to change things up. The first technique I want to cover is changing a complete progression or just a single chord from major to minor. That's really useful, especially in cadences, where it's also used quite a lot. You will hear it all the time if you check out, especially people like Bill Evans and Herbie Hancock will do this very often. So if you have a minor cadence, so E half diminished to A7 to D minor, for instance, then instead of playing E half diminished, we'd make that into the two that we would expect if we were going to major, so this sound. And that way we're getting a completely different sound and a much more brighter sound that really stands out. And then you can still choose to alter the dominant to go back to the D minor. This way of working is just a really simple way of doing something that's usually going to fit pretty well with what the bass player is playing and still really effective. And if you do this on the first few bars of Stella by Starlight, you get something like this. And an example of a solo line using these changes would sound something like this. As I said, I think the way you want to work with this is to take the technique and then experiment with using it in your own solos and also in your own arrangements, just to hear how it sounds, and you want to hear it in a context. This is a tool to surprise the listener. So if you think of it like that, then you also have to remember that timing is really essential with this. So if you want to reharmonize an AABA form, then it makes a lot more sense to reharmonize the beginning of the A after the bridge. So we already heard the first two A's and we're setting up an expectation of this is what the beginning of an A part sounds like, and then when we're returning from the bridge we get a different sound. And actually if you listen to how people are using reharmonizations, you will hear that happen very often. Another technique that works really well and is also very common is to use tritone substituted 2/5s. What you can do here is that you can add a complete 2/5 that's a half step above the following chord and kind of use that as a substitute for the 2 chord. So in this example, I'm doing that on There'll Never Be Another You. That sounds like this. So what you have here is that usually you would have D half diminished in bar 3 and then go to G7, and then you can substitute that with E flat minor, A flat 7, and then D half diminished G7. And you can even go a little bit further and choose to say E flat minor 7, A flat 7 to D minor 7, so we get a D minor chord instead of a D half diminished like we're used to, and that way add sort of an extra detail in the reharmonization and a little bit more movement. I think one of the things that makes this work is that we just have a bar that's moving more than a single chord, and in that way we get some extra movement, and that's probably the bigger effect, because you could also just choose to say, well, instead of playing the D half diminished, I'm just playing A flat 7 to G7, and that's going to be a lot less effectful. In the solo line for this example, I'm also using the D minor chord because I think it is a nice color to have in there, and it's just an extra trip outside, and the G7 altered is really a smooth way to take us back into the tonality of E flat or C minor. The third technique that I want to talk about is using parallel minor chords. And there are also two variations of this that are very common that I want to show you. The first one is to reharmonize a diminished chord into a minor chord, and in that way create sort of chromatic movement with minor chords. Usually you would use sort of a Dorian sound. It's really coming out of that time where they use Dorian really a lot. The other one is coming from a completely different place, because here you're not really reharmonizing a chord. In that way you're taking a bass note in a descending minor progression and then turning that into a minor chord, and then using that to get pretty much the same idea that you're just playing parallel minor chords in some sort of interval moving through the progression. This first example is Someday My Prince Will Come, and as you can tell, this is one where the reharmonization doesn't actually fit with the melody, so I changed the melody, and you will even have songs that do this. Dawn the Dream is one of them, where there are kind of two versions of the melody, one where it's reharmonized with a minor chord and one where it's the original diminished chord. But here we have the original progression from Someday My Prince Will Come, which is D minor to D flat diminished to C minor to F7, and then the reharmonization of this, which is turning this D minor into sort of a D minor 9. I'm kind of announcing that I'm going to do the parallel minor thing by playing the 9th here really clearly, and then going down to the D flat minor and then to C minor. This is a very, very common thing to come across. You can find this in a lot of Keith Jarrett solos when he's playing over diminished chords that later in the song he'll turn it into minor chords. Kurt Rosenwinkel does this in his solo on All or Nothing at All. It's easy to improvise over because playing parallel minor chords in a solo is something that's quite easy to execute and very effectful also. At the same time, since it never really fits with the melody, you can hear I'm changing the melody in the chord melody arrangement as well, then there you kind of have to be a little bit more tricky with it, and it's not very common to see this used in the theme of a song. A soloing example using parallel minor chords instead of diminished chords could sound something like this. The harmonized bassline version of the parallel minor chords that I want to talk about is coming out of this progression. So if we have a D minor 7, and then that's going to D minor with C in the bass, to B half diminished to E7, that's the essential movement here. You will have that in Green Dolphin Street or How Deep Is the Ocean. There are quite a few songs that has that type of progression. And really what happens is that we're turning D minor, and then we have the D minor, and then we're moving to D minor with C in the bass. We're going to make that a C minor chord, and then the B half diminished is going to be a B minor chord. So again, it's just about turning all these different chords into these sort of Dorian or sort of basic minor 7 sounds, and then use that. And then again, we have a dominant that's going to take us sort of back into the song and moving away from just all the parallel moving harmony. This example is on the Days of Wine and Roses, the last part of the song where we have this progression and where you can kind of fit that idea onto the melody as well. You can find melodies where it fits completely, but most of the time this actually doesn't fit with the melody, and you would only use it in solos and then just make use of it there as an extra effect. I've actually analyzed a few solos where this happens. There's a Bill Evans solo on I Love You that I did a video on, and also a Bill Frisell solo on How Deep Is the Ocean, where he's using this as well. So it is a very common thing. You'll find it used all the time, and it's also just a nice way to just step out of the tonality and then get back in a very easy way. That's why it's so easy to apply in a solo. An example of a solo line over these changes would sound something like this. With rules like these, I'm of course only scratching the surface, but I think these rules are sort of easy to apply to a lot of songs, and you have some options. You can start messing around with it, and then you can always take it further. Essentially, you can do whatever you want with this. You don't have to only improvise on the chords. You can actually improvise with the chords themselves. If you want to check out some other takes and some other videos where I'm reharmonizing songs, then check out this short playlist where I have a few examples of videos that are a little bit more advanced than this one.